In this episode, I'm breaking down 5 things that you may have missed when you read through the new FDA Quality Management System Regulation, or QMSR. If it's your first time tuning into Let's Combinate, I'm Subhi Saadeh, and I use this podcast, Let's Combinate, to break down topics in medical device and pharma and bring clarity to the complex systems that we work in every single day. Before I go into the 5 things, I wanted to talk about some important timeline and context because there's some things as far as the history goes. Both QSR and ISO 13485 came out in 1996, the first version. When it came out, the QSR was the first binding regulatory rule in the US of its kind, where it was not only talking about GMPs, it started talking about requirements for the quality system. At the same time, ISO 13485 came out with its first revision, but it was really modeled off of ISO 9001. While they came out in the same year, the QSR was developed independently, and ISO 13485 ended up maturing more and more with the 2003 update and updates later as the go-to globally harmonized reference, eventually becoming something that we all use and work through in industry. So now that we understand that they both came out in 1996, FDA has been talking about this harmonization for a long time. It goes back to 2018 when they first started announcing their intent to align 21 CFR 820 eventually with ISO 13485. And in February of 2022, the first proposed rule was published, and they gave the normal 3-month public comment period. And they took the feedback from industry, and then they gave us the finalized rule for the QMSR in February of 2024. So we are now officially in the 2-year implementation window, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the first main takeaway is that the QMSR is harmonizing to ISO 13485, but it's not a copy-paste exercise, and 21 CFR 820 isn't actually going away. Even though it is now called the Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR, it's still 21 CFR 820, and the number hasn't changed, but what is in 820 has now changed to reference ISO 13485. It's a nuanceical point, but it is to say that FDA basically deleted its old text in 820 and either incorporated the 13485 reference, or it spoke to FDA-specific definitions and expectations. So some of the legacy terms that we all know and love, and some of the stuff that is almost like muscle memory, second nature, like design history file, DHF, or device master record, DMR, device history record, DHR, these are no longer mentioned in the regulation. And because of that, I think there's going to be a transition period where we start to phase out some of that language, but don't think that means that you can stop maintaining those records, obviously, because you still need to have a DHF. You need to maintain the intent of the DMR and so forth. And FDA made this clear in its preamble that they still expect these functions to be captured. You just need to ensure that the ISO terms are aligned to it. So if your QMS is built around the old FDA terminology, it's time to move to the new terminology. The next one, and this one caught some people by surprise and ends up tripping some people up, is that having an ISO 13485 certification doesn't by itself mean that you are now compliant to the Quality Management System Regulation. This is because FDA added its own expectations on top of ISO 13485. So things like UDI or labeling controls, complaint handling, medical device reporting are still going to be done in accordance with the US law. So I think the way to think about Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR, is that it is ISO 13485 plus the FDA overlays on top of it. And the QMSR structure makes global compliance a little bit easier because FDA is highlighting what their requirements are, but they're also highlighting that they're still going to inspect you by their way. Notified bodies in the EU, they make sure that you are conforming to requirements, but FDA is more about enforcement. So the inspections are done in a way that's different than audits. It's not a conformity assessment only. The third takeaway is that while risk management isn't spoken to explicitly, it is still expected. This one is subtle. It's talked about in the preamble, and the QMSR doesn't explicitly incorporate ISO 14971, but the preamble makes it clear that they expect manufacturers to implement a risk-based quality management system that's consistent with it. So even though ISO 14971 isn't in the language, the expectation is still very much there, and FDA wants to see risk management integrated not only into your design, but into your supplier management, into your manufacturing, into your post-market activities in a similar fashion that you would see with ICH Q9. And if you're interested in some of the differences between ICH Q9 and ISO 14971, you can look at the video that I did on that a few months ago. But this is a really, I think, important takeaway that is in the subtle text of the preamble. The fourth takeaway is some of the important exemptions that industry had are gone. So under the old QSR, certain manufacturers like CMOs or companies that didn't have direct responsibility for the design or ownership of the design could argue their way out of maybe providing internal audits or even management reviews, depending on how they were structured. And with QMSR, the regulation now applies universally across the board to all medical device manufacturers. And whether you are a virtual company that has a fully outsourced supply chain, or you're a small startup that's working out of a lab, or you're a large OEM that's using a CMO or other manufacturing partners, it applies to you. And FDA makes it clear that just because the old model had a carve out for things like management reviews or internal audits, the effort of harmonization doesn't stop when it comes to exemption. So they had an exemption. ISO 13485 didn't have that exemption. Other regulators don't apply that exemption. So my read of their response in the preamble is that we used to give an exemption. Nobody else gives the exemption, so we are not going to give that exemption anymore. So basically, if you've relied on being out of scope, some of that leeway is gone and there isn't that exemption anymore. And now the last and most important one is that the clock is now ticking, and you have until February 2nd of 2026. So going back to the timeline, the QMSR final rule was published on February 2nd, 2024. And the new compliance deadline is February 2nd of 2026. So this 2-year window isn't just for you to read it, it's for you to have it fully implemented. So what FDA expects you to do is run a gap assessment between your QMS and ISO 13485. Make sure that you're training your team on the ISO terminology, what the intention is of ISO, update as needed your SOPs or work instructions, forms. If you want to do an internal audit, you can do that as well. And now you need to make sure that you're not only meeting the ISO requirements, but also the FDA-specific overlays. FDA has so there's some work that needs to be done there, but also in the preamble, FDA talks about how they're using this period to also retrain their inspectors, update their internal policies and inspection procedures, and shift from their QSR-based audit to ISO 13485-based inspections, basically with an FDA twist on top. Something that we're all waiting for patiently in industry is what does the update to QSIT look like? Because there's just been a bunch of rumblings on that, but not a whole lot of noise. If you're waiting until late 2025 to start this work, you're basically already behind. So that's it for this episode. The 5 key insights on the QMSR that maybe go beyond the basic reading of it is just because it's incorporating ISO 13485 doesn't mean that it's no longer 820. So it's still 820, but everything in 820 has changed to reference ISO 13485. Again, a bit of a tongue twister there. The second point is that ISO 13485 is the baseline, but not the ceiling. There is more that FDA added onto it. The third one is that risk management is still an important consideration. And just because it's not explicitly stated, that it's still something that is important and mentioned in the preamble. 4 is that some exemptions that companies used to have are gone. And 5 is that the clock is ticking now and that February 2026 is getting closer and closer. And FDA is shifting their mindset with this update towards global harmonized risk management. FDA is switching their mindset when it comes to regulation towards a globally harmonized risk-based approach. And I think QMSR is pretty awesome. I'm a huge advocate for harmonization, and having worked with 21 CFR 20 and ISO 13485 and had to write quality manuals that meet both requirements, I'm personally really excited about this update, and I think it's something that is welcome, and I think they did a great job with it. If this helped you, please like it, share it, and I'm Subhi Saadeh. If this helped you understand QMSR, please share it, like it, leave a comment below, and please hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.